Alright, what is up guys? Johnny Two Fingers here, and I am back with another Far Cry 5 map editor tutorial. I am going to get into the landscaping tools, just to show you guys how to build a nice beautiful landscape and shape the ground and really get into some detail about it. I'm not just going to raise and lower ground and throw some texture on there. I'm actually going to show you guys how to make something beautiful. I'm glad to see people getting on board with Far Cry 5. However, I'm also not so glad to see all these really terrible maps being uploaded. So my goal is to mitigate some of that and to help you guys build better maps, so that the community can see that you can do some really incredible things with this map editor and not just do the flat maps or the, just throw some hills and some textures on there. There's more to it than that. If you want to do something that's going to get the positive votes, the positive feedback, so a lot of it is aesthetics. It's not 100%, but that is a lot of it. Alright, let's get right into it. First thing I'm going to show you guys is the texture menu here. We start right out with this nice generic texture here, and this is really great for when you're trying to lay out 90-degree objects and stuff like that. You can kind of use that as a guide to sort of help lay out your map a little bit, to keep everything a little bit straight and 90 degrees. It's really useful for when you're constructing buildings and stuff like that, when you're doing more like custom build, angular structures, but we're not doing that. I'm just going to go straight organic here. So first, I don't have any menus up. They're kind of tucked off to the side here. I like to do that when I'm just trying to get some nice screenshots of my work here. So yeah, this is my little menu off to the side here. I'm going to click on the texture painter, which is the hotkey for that. See, when I hover over this button and my hotkeys, okay, it's F1. So you can just hit F1 and it'll bring up your texture painter. So I've got this window over here, and this is going to show some texture windows here. So I'm going to click on this here. This is our main in-game editor default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click change, and this is going to bring up this nice texture list here. So I just want to pick just like a nice natural texture that's not just going to be, it's not going to be an eyesore when you're looking at it repeating. These textures can be used in various ways. You can kind of mix them together. There is a limit on how many textures you can actually put in here. So I'm actually gonna fill up my texture bar here and just get everything in here and ready to go. My first texture I'm gonna throw in here is Alpine Forest. So I just want to click on this, go down and hit OK, and that's going to swap out my texture here. And this is my default, my main texture, so that's going to replace all of this that's on the ground here. It looks really bright, it's very vivid. It's not necessarily something I want to have my whole map looking like, so we're going to do some other textures here. So I'm going to go ahead and add another one. I like to do like a nice mixture of like kind of dirt and stone and grass, and there's various combinations of textures you can do to just really have a nice natural organic look instead of just having just like big chunks of just solid texture. I'm gonna go, let's see, this one looks all right, and I'll add another one. Let's see, I've got dirt rock. Let's see, I'll throw some, I definitely want to have some actual stone. So I'm gonna go with, let's just go with a simple rock cliff, nothing too fancy for now. I'll just click on that, and I believe we have a total of 4 that we can use. I know that was the case in Far Cry 4. This map editor is very similar. I do have tutorials for the Far Cry 4 map editor as well, but I figured I may as well just go through and just refresh everybody on Far Cry 5. And for those of you that are new to my tutorials, thank you for subscribing, and thank you for being here and checking this out, and I hope that this is helping. My goal is to I just want to see just the best maps that we can put out there, and that's really for the benefit of all of us. For my final texture, I'm just going to pick a nice gravel texture here. Let's see, I'm going to use this generic gravel. That'll work. So alright, now that I have my textures all selected, 4 is our maximum. Alright, so Everything here is pretty straightforward. I mean, just looking at this menu, you can pretty much figure it out. You can see that obviously when you change the hardness, this little circle, this yellow circle in the center expands and contracts. That's just how hard the texture will paint. See how it's got a nice little soft edge to it. You can kind of really just brush in really nice soft textures that way. That's if you really don't want to have like a lot of hard edges. You can crank your hardness up if you want to do something a little more solid. And you can also obviously decrease the radius of your brush here. You can shrink that right down and get some really nice fine detail there. So I'm going to jump in here and just show you like, you know, the harder version of this texture. I'll make it a little bigger so you can actually see it. So yeah, we get a nice hard edge. Now it seems like it was a little slow to pick up the texture there, so I'm still getting a little bit more kind of fading there, but you notice how it's just harder around the edge. You still have this defined line here. If you want to have it really solid, you just crank your speed up. That should really increase how solid. Yeah, see, that's got a nice hard line there. It works. I mean, at least you're trying and you're putting the texture in there. But what we want to do is we want to kind of mix it up a little bit here and there. Now this is fine for like a gravel path. If you're just trying to do like a simple little gravel pathway, that's really not a big deal. You can have a nice solid texture there. But what you really want to do is try to just break your textures up a little bit. Make it just look a little more natural. If you have those hard lines everywhere, it just looks cheap. And we're going for a nice realistic appearance here. So yeah, for like a nice path, that's fine. That'll work. So if you want to kind of break the texture up a little bit, this is really the best way to go here. So I'm going to shrink the radius down just a little bit here. And my speed is up still. I'm going to turn my hardness down because I do want to have it a little softer. And now what I like to do is to just have a nice kind of dusting of other textures thrown in here. And you can kind of see that it changes the texture up. It makes it just look a little more natural. It looks like you just put a little more effort into your map. I mean, just the little subtle touches like that make a huge difference. Yeah, when you see what you actually get down on ground level here, now you see you're not just looking at just like one solid plain texture. It doesn't look so fake. It's not so cheap looking. And you can just kind of just do this over the whole area if you want. If you really want to just kind of say we're going to build in this little area here, so we can just fill this in and kind of just scribble over it with a softer dirt rock texture here. You know, you just move a little slower and you'll end up painting a little bit more. It goes a little more intense when you move it a little slower. You can actually see that. I mean, clearly you can see that I'm like scribbling and I have these swirly lines in here, but over time this is going to accumulate. It seems like this is kind of a tedious endeavor to do this to your whole map. Just little things like this are going to help kind of break up the monotony of your textures. That's really what really makes it believable. Right, see, when you get back down into the ground here, now we have just a little bit more of a natural look. And you can just jump in. Clicking this button here, you can jump in and kind of run around and actually see through what it's actually going to look like when you're in game. It's a little more believable just having that broken up texture there. You can even see when you look out here, you're just little patches of different color. Naturally, it still doesn't look great. It's not perfect because our landscape is still really flat, and that's just really unappealing. So what I want to do is I want to actually get this grid out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my editor preferences here. Yeah, see, I have budget grid clicked on. There we go. So now I've turned off my budget grid, and now I can see just the nice, beautiful, flat plains. All right, so we want to raise and lower our ground here. The first tool is the bump tool. This does exactly what's on the tin. It raises and lowers. So what we can do here is just click and it'll raise the ground, and it kind of does automatically flatten things out a little bit. If you want to undo it, just Control Z goes back, just like any other function that you would have there. It's fine. You can raise up your textures here, and I've seen a lot of guys just doing hills like this. You know, just like nice flat, simple hills. What you end up with those is sort of roundy, sort of smooth. That's really not the most interesting looking hill. I mean, you can get away with it, you know, it does work. It's a hill, but it's very clear that there's not really effort put into hills like this. I've seen this just way too much. And we're all figuring things out. It's fine. If you want to experiment and play with that, there's nothing wrong with experimentation, learning the editor. It's, you know, it's cool to play with it a bit. Just don't be upset when you upload your map and it gets downvoted a lot. There's a lot of guys that have been playing Far Cry for a long time, and they see those low effort maps and they're just going to get voted down. It's inevitable. But instead of letting that discourage you, and instead of letting that make you want to give up and not bother with it, you should just keep pushing. Use that as an inspiration to do better and to be better at it. And that was my inspirational moment from Johnny Two Fingers. All right, so what I recommend doing if you want to have a little bit more of a natural flow and terrain look, you can just make your, you know, the bump just a little smaller. You turn your speed down a little bit and just get in there and kind of just pepper it in there a little bit with just variation, just some natural variation. And I like to just cut like a little bit of, you know, sort of erosion lines in there. You can do this manually, or we have an erosion tool. I can just show you that in a second here. So I'm just going to go down the line here. So we have the raise and lower tool. When you click on this and you just click, you'll see it'll pop it up if you want to give it a little bit of variation. There is a limit to the variation though. If you also want to make it like so you can navigate the actual landscape, and this will bump it up by a little bit, and you can also increase the height, and that'll change how high it's bumping things up and distorting the ground and all that. The distortion is literally just how much it's actually distorting the ground. Now I've seen people build hills like this. Amazingly, in the Far Cry 5 map editor, you can kind of get away with this a little more than you could before, because it does retile your textures on these cliffs here, so it's a little nicer to look at. It's still really obvious that you're doing this. You're not fooling me. So don't do that. Don't just pop up a flat edge like that. See, when you have those hard edges, it's not. Unless it's part of the aesthetic of your map, this is very unnatural. It's not very nice to look at. But this tool, if you use it the right way and you're a little more subtle about these things, it really is just based on what you plan on doing with it too. It's based on your actual desired outcome. There's no hard and fast rule here. When I'm telling you these things, it doesn't necessarily apply to everything. I mean, you can play around with stuff. If you're doing something surreal or alien landscape, that works. It's fine. You can get away with those things. If you're trying to do realistic, that's not realistic. All right, so the other function of this tool is to lower the landscape. So if you hold control, see I have like 1.71 as my height, so it'll raise it by that amount, that increment. So if you hold the control key and click, it'll do the opposite of that and it'll lower it. And this will give you a little bit of a dip here. So you can use this tool back and forth, raising and lowering, if you want to just kind of alter your landscape. See, I'm holding control, click, release, click, control, click. So you can kind of go up and down and get a nice sort of varied texture to your landscape. I'm leaving this guy here because I'm going to show you something in a little bit here. So another cool tool is the Flatten tool. So the Flatten tool does just exactly what's on the tin. Also, before I get ahead of myself, all these tools have this square brush option, which will give you a square brush. That's pretty self-explanatory here. So I don't need to, I mean, obviously you guys are smart enough to figure that out. All right, so Flatten. I'm gonna come up here and make a nice little platform. Yeah, get a nice flat surface up here. And this is great if you're just trying to put like buildings or something up on a hill or a surface where you want to have a nice flat area. This will flatten things out nicely. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flatten that, and wherever the center of your brush is, that's what it's going to use as your height. So where I have this pointed right here, so that's where it will flatten to, is the height of this. So you can just kind of do like a nice sort of stepped landscape here and, you know, cut in here like that with it. And if you go too far, you can either undo or just, you know, cut back into it. And you can even get along the side of a hill See how I just pointed at the edge of this wall here, and it's just going to flatten right to that spot, which is really handy. It's really neat. This tool is invaluable when you're doing landscape. Now you think, okay, this doesn't really look that great. It's not really that convincing. I mean, it could be cool if you did the right things with it, but it's not perfect. What's really cool is you can use this ramp tool. The ramp tool, you can change the radius and just the hardness. It's pretty much like the other tools, with the exception that you can't really make it square, but that's fine. It doesn't need to be. All right, to use the ramp tool, you want to click on the beginning of your ramp and you want to click on the end of your ramp. I'm going to bring the radius down just a little bit because I want to have a nice narrow pathway here. So I'm going to start my ramp. I'm going to shrink it down a little more. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it down to like 2 maybe. And what's cool about the PC map editor is you can just type in numbers and it'll just adjust it accordingly. All right, so I'm going to start my ramp here and I'm going to kind of come up at an angle and I'm just going to go boop and then pop the end of my ramp here. So now that just made a nice neat little ramp. And you can just keep doing this. You can keep clicking on different areas and it'll connect the first point to the second point every single time. And you can even kind of like use that to sort of smooth things out if you want. Yeah, a nice little ramp there connecting. It's not really even a ramp, it's pretty much the same height. Yeah, so I'm going to cut up here with it, do another sideways ramp here. And now we're able to navigate this. Once we jump in here on foot, we'll be able to run up these areas, no problem. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. All right, so now I'm going to build another ramp from here. And I like the zigzag switchback ramps, at least for this map that I'm building right now. So we're going to do that. And now we have a nice navigatable area. All right, so there's something that's very important when you're building a map. It has to be legible. It just becomes a challenge to see what you're looking at. Your brain can't process it. The same thing will happen when you have a lot of varying heights and shadows and stuff like that, and everything is the same texture. It's not legible. It's like putting yellow lettering on white paper. It's just really hard to read. So the proper use of textures is very important. So I'll just do a quick demonstration of this now. So I'm going to go back to my texture tool and I'm going to use this rock cliff texture here. I haven't finished up everything here as far as the actual detail of the landscape. I will get to that in a moment. Right now I'm just going to kind of show you how to make this, something like this, just a little more legible to the eye. So when you're running around the map, you can actually tell where you're meant to go. It's easier to see where people are coming from. It doesn't look like so much of a chaotic free-for-all. So I'm just going to get this rock cliff here and I'm going to paint it along the edges here. So what this is doing is it's breaking up that monotonous green texture. And you don't have to be so hard with it. You can kind of pepper it in there just to give yourself a little bit of just variation. See, I'm just like clicking and peppering it in here. And what that does is it breaks up your landscape visually just a little bit. So you don't just have these green hills here. Rolling hills, they're fine if they're, if it's part of the aesthetic of your map, but it's really just a good idea to kind of break things up and just make it visually legible. So see, now we're actually starting to see some variation here. I can tell where we're meant to be walking and where we're meant to be avoiding. You don't want to fall off a cliff, and now I can tell, hey, that's a cliff, because you'll end up falling off of that and breaking your leg, especially if everything is the exact same color. I'm going to come right along here and do the same thing. Just kind of paint this in here. See, now we can tell where we're supposed to be going. And if you just think of the way nature functions, grass tends to really grow more on a horizontal surface anyway. So we're going to think of it in that aspect. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of paint in the grass there. Go back through, paint my rock cliffs here, and you see now that I'm actually starting to have a little bit of variation to the landscape. And you just do this throughout your whole map. I don't have any intentions when I'm building this map. This is really just for demonstration purposes. I'm just playing around with this, but by the time we're done with this, I'm using these specific techniques that I've been using since forever. I've been building maps since the Far Cry Instincts Predator days. You know, it's been quite a bit of time I've spent with the Far Cry map editors. So these are all just things I've learned throughout the years. I don't expect everyone to just come right in knowing these things. That's why I'm doing this tutorial series. I want to help you guys out. I want you guys to be putting out the best work. I want this community to thrive. I want Ubisoft to look at the maps we're putting out and be like, we made a great decision in creating this map editor. That is my ultimate goal here. Alright, so I'm going to hop over to the smooth tool. I can hit F10. And as you can see, if you hover over this, just hit F10. If you can't really figure out your shortcut keys, just go over to Tools, and if you go to your Tools menu, it'll tell you all your shortcuts. You know, noise is F11, smooth is F10. It goes down the whole list. It's all right here for you. So there's things that, I mean, you can figure out a lot of this on your own if you just kind of dig through the menus. It'll tell you a lot. But this can be overwhelming. Even for people that are coming over from the consoles to the PC, things can be a little bit crazy. I don't want to ramble on too much though. So I'm going to jump in and click on this. I'm going to click on this number here and bring it down just a little bit so I'm not so big with it. I'll bring it down to like 2. Okay, that radius is still really big. Why is the smooth tool? Okay, I was like, why is that so big? All right, so I'm clicking and dragging here, and as you see, it's kind of averaging out the landscape. It's taking the average height and kind of smoothing things out a little bit. So now we're not going to have that sort of rough, weird edge to it. And when you look at the edge where the cliff and the ground connect here, you see it's like very angular. Sometimes that looks cool, sometimes it doesn't. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I don't really like the way this looks. So I'm going to turn my speed down on this smooth tool a little bit and just click in here and see how it just kind of takes that edge off just a little bit. It just kind of smooths things out. And if you're looking at that and say, well, visually that doesn't make sense to smooth that out. Well, that is why we have these texture tools. So I'm going to go back through here with the dirt texture and just kind of paint this in here. And now you can kind of see that, okay, some dirt has accumulated there a little bit. It makes a little bit of sense. I can throw some gravel in there. I really highly recommend mixing your textures together a little bit. Just kind of get a nice little blend. If you turn your hardness way down and turn your speed down, what'll happen is you'll get textures overlapping. It'll look like you can basically create a whole new type of texture based on the other textures that you're using. So if I just kind of lightly click in here, I guess you can't really lightly click, there's only one way to click. Just kind of tap in here and you can actually see that I'm slowly adding this other texture in here. And you see how they're kind of blending together? That we have a limit of 4 textures here, so you really got to get creative. This is a way, for, at least as far as I'm concerned, this is a way for me to kind of get more bang for my buck as far as my texture limitations here. So now you can see they're almost kind of blending into new textures. You can't really tell from far away, they just kind of blur it a little bit. But when you get right up on it, I mean, that's almost a new type of texture you're looking at there. It's just a blend of 2 or 3 textures. So yeah, all these little tips that I'm telling you guys, it's gonna just improve the visual quality of your maps immensely. We're gonna go over the actual layout and function in another tutorial. I'm gonna go down I'm gonna break down the concepts behind building a map. I'm gonna break down team deathmatch, deathmatch, even the linear single player map. So I'm just gonna kind of give you just some map building theory to go on here. All right, so now you see that this is actually starting to take shape here. It's becoming a lot more legible. Now when I look at this, I can tell where I have to go. I can tell where people can move around and where you can actually walk. That makes a huge difference. It makes your map way less confusing. And sure, you think, okay, it'll be fun to confuse people. It's not fun. People don't like to be confused. How frustrating is it when you play a video game and you can't tell what the hell you have to do? there's a certain point at which you're going to give up and walk away from it, and you're going to write a comment on the forum, and you're going to say, this game was a piece of crap, I want my money back. You don't want your maps doing that. Just for the sake of everyone playing this game. If you care at all, just put that extra little bit of effort into it. Make it legible. Please, for the love of God. All right, so now you can see things kind of starting to take shape here. So this ugly eyesore that I was talking about earlier, this guy, I'm gonna fix him, and I'm gonna use what is called the erosion tool. And what this does is kind of simulates natural erosion, the sort of weathering and wearing away of the dirt and rocks and soil and such. So yeah, you just kind of hover over that and just click and hold, and what you see is that you can kind of see this thing. It looks like it's melting. That is simulating natural erosion. Now, that looks more like a rock than anything. So if I wanted to have a big pointy rock there, I could turn that into a big pointy rock. Which I know I've seen some people trying to go for that look. There's nothing wrong with the pointy rocks look. Just erode your rocks if you're going to do that, and it'll just make your map just look just a little bit sexier. And everybody likes a sexy map. All right, so now since I'm declaring this to be a rock, I am going to... Okay, one thing I do not like about this is that when you're trying to adjust the size of this, it's really, there's not really much of a gray area there. All right, so now I have a rock, and it actually looks like a rock. Yeah, I mean, it's just a few clicks of a button, and I've actually made that somewhat realistic looking rock. So yeah, I don't really like the point on that, so I'm gonna go up here and grab the smooth tool. Because I don't really like the point on this rock here. And I'm gonna expand this, and I'm gonna smooth this out just a little bit, and that's gonna soften it just a little. Okay, and then you look at the rock and be like, well, you spent all that time eroding it. Well, you just go back to your erosion tool and click on that, and what do you know? It's turning back into a rock again. And the textures can only do so much for you. You know, the textures are there to help out your geometry. They're there to help your shapes make sense. So yeah, now we've got this something that's actually starting to look like something. I don't really have any solid plans for this at all. I'm just kind of throwing stuff in here. Before I get ahead of myself here, there's another trick here for painting your landscapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my bump tool, and I'm just going to make some mountains in here. I'm going to crank my speed up here. This is nice, fast, quick mountains. Alright. And then I'm going to turn my radius down and get some variations and some peaks in here. It's always a good idea to just kind of raise the edges of your map just a little bit so you don't have this sort of hard fall off edge here. If you're building this type of map, every map is going to be a little different, but this is kind of an old school trick. Alright, so I'm going to take my noise tool here. So what the noise does is it kind of just does a variation on raising and lowering. So it kind of just creates this sort of, well, a noise. Instead of just doing a straight raising and lowering, it raises and lowers at the same time. So you can end up with this sort of dimpling effect. It's like a nice, natural, chunky dimpling effect here. It's a really good way to make your map look a little more natural. I really like the noise tool in the Far Cry 5 map editor. It's a lot more effective than it was in the Far Cry 4 editor. I don't know what they've done to change it other than just the noise is a little more dense. I don't know if the poly count is higher on the ground. It seems to be. It seems like you're getting a much smaller peaks to this, so the rocks have a nice natural rough look to them. All right, so I'm gonna go back over here, make some noise. Beep, beep, beep. That's where I throw in the the air horn sound. All right, so I've got a nice eroded sort of mountainous look over here. I dig it, and you can change like the landslide. If you want it to be a higher landslide, or if you want to take that down a little bit, so it doesn't quite have as much of that effect. You can crank the deformation up, so that really just kind of warps the landscape a little more. You can turn that down. I mean, there's all kinds of options here. And what I mean, you can see what natural erosion does. It makes a mountain. That's why mountains look the way they do. So yeah, I'm actually building a nice mountain range here, just clicking. Just going back and forth between my tools and just clicking around. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my texture tool here. And if you scroll down in your texture tool, now you can see the brush constraints. If you want to just paint just the tops of the mountains here, you actually can change your minimum and maximum altitude. So I'm gonna put these kind of relatively closer here. I'm gonna blow up my. I'm gonna expand the radius of my brush here quite a bit because I want to cover a large area. So you see, I have this cutoff line here. So this is my minimum altitude. This is the lowest this texture will go. So if I decrease my minimum altitude and undo that, and then try that again, you'll see that line comes up just a little further. So if I want to do just the tippity tops, especially if I wanted to paint snow or something up there, I just adjust my altitude. I think there's actually a way to tell what your altitude is here. All right, so I've set my minimum altitude to 72, and when you point at the ground here, you should see the line. So I'm going to point right here, and you're going to see 72. So this down here is my altitude. This bottom right number here. So this is going to be how I can tell where my altitude is. So I can just literally point right at that point in the ground, and I'm getting roughly around 72. So say I want it to be, let's just say 60.69, right at this point where I'm pointing at. So if I come over here, I type in 60.69, and now you'll see that it's coming down to that line. Like if you want to do a mountain with snow caps on it or something like that, you can totally do that. So that's okay. I mean, it looks okay. So if you want to change the altitude fuzziness, so there's not such a hard, strict line on that, now I've got just a little bit of variation in the altitude that's acceptable. That looks a lot more natural. I still don't like it. It's still too hard of an edge. So what we're going to do is change the slope. Now the slope is the angle at which the ground is at. So now what you're going to see is a little bit more peppering based on the actual slope. So since this is flat, it's not going to get that because there's not as much of a slope. So the more of a slope there is when you change this, the minimum slope here, you see now that's starting to look a lot more natural. And this is just something you want to play with and tweak. There's not like any specific set way to do this. It's really going to depend on the actual map that you're making. So yeah, I mean, let me undo that a couple more times and just, you just play with it a little bit. I mean, that's like a nice, natural, peppery look to that. I've said peppery a few times in this tutorial, so that's the word of the day, peppery. Yeah. And then we got a nice variation in the texture there. I don't really like the grass up there. It's not, I'm not going to really keep that. That was just really for demonstration purposes. All right. So now that I've gotten that little mountain range there, didn't really have any plans on doing anything with it. It's just for a demonstration here, really. All right, so now when you get over here and you've got a nice view here, now you can see stuff way in the background. It's like, okay, cool. I can see the background a little bit. But what's really gonna set the background apart from the foreground here is turning on the fog. I have fog showing, but I don't actually have any fog happening here. So I just go up to the environment settings here. Let me minimize this. And I'm just gonna get some fog going. Let's see. Fog. See, now when I turn the fog up, you can kind of see, okay, now I can see that there's some depth there. I'm not going to get into the actual like adjusting of the fog too much. That's going to be for another tutorial. I'm just going to kind of break down the sort of finer details of the map. But now putting some fog in there, you can kind of see that there's some nice depth and some distance between the foreground and the background. And you can, you know, move the fog forward and back. Yeah, see now you got a nice layer of fog back there. And that's just to really create a sense of depth there. Before I get sidetracked, I'm going to finish out telling you guys about some of these tools here. All right, next up we have the water tool. So say I want to just throw a lake over here. I'm just going to stick a lake right here. I'm just going to have some water right here. So I place my water, and I can click on it and move it around like an object. This is essentially an object. So I treat it just like any of the other objects that I'm working with. And if you watch my objects tutorial, you'll know exactly how to move this stuff around. I'm just going to click on this arrow and drag it down and sink it down to the ground here a little bit. So now I've got a little spot of water here. All right, so this water level here, this will actually affect sort of the global water level here. It's hard to see the effect of it right away. You have to kind of adjust it and then wait, because it takes a while to load. It's really easy to just kind of overwhelm yourself with this thing and just like crank it up too fast and too high and end up flooding your whole map out. So now you can see, all right, so now this water level has taken over all of the water. And it's funny, you can have water underneath the water, which is pretty silly. All right, so I'm gonna bring this back down because you guys have an idea of what the hell's going on here. This is our ocean water, and you can just change the appearance of this. So now I've got my lake here. So what I want to do is I'm gonna go to my object selection here, my move tool rather. I'm gonna go to my move tool, and then I can scoot this thing around, kind of place it where I want. So what's going to happen is sometimes you'll have like a little edge there. That's just, obviously that's ridiculous. You don't want to have an edge to your water like that. Yeah, so it's got to have the same edge over here. So you just get your raise tool, or your bump tool rather. You just get your bump tool out, and then you can bring up the landscape just a little bit, just to meet up with the edge of your water here. You see, that's just problem solved. I don't know what the hell I just clicked on. All right. Yeah, and then you don't have that funky edge anymore. Now your water just kind of comes up to the edge of the cliff here. And you do the same thing here. Now a really easy way to do this, I can just get my flatten tool here and bring the radius down a little bit, and then I could just drag this out and then come straight across with it. The ramp tool is also a really a quick way to do this as well. So you can just take the ramp tool and do the same thing. Click over here and then click over here, and it's going to create a ramp, which is essentially a straight wall there. Yeah, see now I've got that butted right up to the edge there. So I'm going to go back over to my flatten tool, and I'm going to make all this relatively the same height over here. So I'm going to click on the top of this wall and bring it out a bit, and just try to make that make some more sense here. And bring up the radius just a little bit. I'm going to knock that up to 2 here. And there we go. And now I've got a nice barrier for my water so it doesn't go flowing out everywhere. Not that it would actually, but aesthetically it creates that illusion. And you obviously, unless you're trying to have like a flat wall there, to me that doesn't really look natural. I don't really like the way that looks. And say, okay, that's just a rock there. Just make it make sense. You have to, when you're doing this type of stuff, you just have to actually think about how things function in nature, how it's going to function in the real world. You know, would there be just a flat edge there with some grass on it? Probably not. That is unlikely. And depending on what type of stone you have there, it might not even be all that natural either. So you just kind of give it a little bit of variation. It's all about just trying to make it look natural, make it look realistic. It's gonna help you in the long run make a better map. And even if your layout of your map isn't great, and it's not really all that fun to play, at least it was pretty. So that kind of works. Or you could just smooth it right out and just put some dirt on there. So a lot of people will just neglect the grass texture that's on the bottom of this water here. I am not going to be doing that. I will actually be painting a color down there. So I'm just going to give just a little bit of a different vibe to it. So I'm going to layer this. I'm going to throw the dirt down first and have the dirt kind of peeking up out of the edges of the water here. So now when you get down here, you can actually look and see, oh, I got a little bit of variation of the texture here. And now on the actual bottom, I'm going to go down and shrink this down a little bit, knock it down to right about there. And I'm just going to crank my speed up. It's just going to paint it a lot faster. And I'm going to have some gravel. My thinking behind putting the gravel here is, well, I've got this cliff texture here, right? I've got these rocks here. So maybe over time, something has just broken the rocks away. The wind and the rain and the natural erosion has just kind of broken that down. And then all that gravel is kind of filled in this area here. So now when you go down in here, you can see on the bottom of the water, oh, I got some nice gravel texture. It's just a little more realistic that way, So people will be underneath the water here. People will be kind of jumping in and swimming around. It does happen. If someone's running around your map, they're going to end up in the water. And if they end up in the water and see, oh, this guy didn't put any textures in here, then they're, it's going to influence them one way or the other on your map. I know it seems like a minor detail, but people will, especially if you're entering contests for your map especially, people will go in and pick apart all those details. They're going to look at your floating objects, things that aren't set right, and that's going to count against you as far as actually voting on a map. And believe me, there will be contests for maps. There's rumors about that there is a map sharing website that I'm not going to name at this moment because I'm not with them in an official capacity at this point. But they're talking about doing cash prizes for maps. So if there's no incentive for you guys to build better maps up until now, people are handing out cash prizes at some point. So yeah, all these little details do count. If nothing else will convince you to put a little more effort in, maybe cash and prizes. I will be announcing that at some point down the line here. I'll be doing a video about that eventually, just not at this moment. But that's a thing that's happening. So that's really kind of crazy and exciting, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just gonna kind of just speed through this and just kind of shape my landscape real quick. So I'm gonna just kind of do a little time lapse here. All right, guys. So as you see, I'm just playing around with this stuff. I'm just clicking around. The more you work the ground and the more you add the textures and change it and tweak it to your liking, the better the outcome is going to be. A good map takes a while. It definitely takes some time. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the road tool. I'm just going to go ahead and put a road in here. Yeah, so I'm going to add a road. I want to have a nice simple, just a gravel path. So I'm going to click on gravel path, and now I've got my gravel path here. You can change the width of your path. I'm just going to have it set right here for now. It's hard to tell until you actually have it in here. All right, so you just get your pen, and then you can draw this in here. And every time you change angles, it's going to add another anchor point here. When you come to the end of this line, you have to just click on it again and drag off of that, and then it'll continue your pathway here. So what I want to do is I just want to run this line right up and around and up my really obvious pathway that I've carved out here. And what this path tool is going to do is it's just going to make it really clear where you want people to go. Now obviously people are going to go where they want to go, but this kind of is a guideline. It kind of guides people around your map a little bit, and it also has a nice aesthetic. It's visually just appealing to have a pathway like this. Now you can see this path is just not perfect. There's always things you can do to adjust it. First thing I want to do is I want to shrink it a little bit because it's a little wide for my purposes here. So now it's not overlapping too much. So if I want to adjust it, I'll just go to my plus or minus. So I'm going to add a point here. I want to add a point right here and just kind of drag it over, and that just changes the angle a little bit. If you feel like you don't want this hard corner here, you can just pop that in there and just adjust your angle on it a little bit. Yeah, so I really don't like that this is going this way. I want it to go up this way. So I want to just go and get my remove and just click on these points, and then they will disappear for you. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and just grab that pen tool again and draw it back out here. And every time you click, it should add another point for you. If you want to do it like that, that's another way to go about it. You can just click and drag, and if it'll average out, you see how it just kind of straightened everything out. It just makes the assumption that you don't need all those points in there, and then it removes some of them for you. I feel like it's a little less organic that way. I'm gonna go back in here and try to add some points. So I'm gonna click and drag over here, and you see I'm able to actually get a little bit more natural flow back into this again. So when you're manually adding your points in, it's not gonna screw you over on that. So you can have a nice smooth flowing pathway, and it's not gonna be all jagged and artificial looking. And that is just a way to add just another element of design to your map. The pathways are pretty cool. I mean, there's so many different types of paths too. I mean, you can really get in and add like highways, and I mean, there's asphalt, there's a trail of blood. I mean, there's footprints. You know, if you wanted to do kind of a creepy horror map, you could do like blood footprints and stuff. I mean, there's so many options here. It's really pretty fantastic. And you see, as I'm going, I'm just kind of tweaking and adjusting things. It's easier to just kind of shape things as you go, or as you notice things. It's easier to just continually add and adjust as you're building. You'll definitely want to go through and make a few passes and tweak and adjust things and make things flow a little better. I'm just kind of doing a quick, like a quick overview of just kind of how to carve everything out and smooth everything out. Yeah, so right here I've got this angle on my road here. I really don't like that. There's just a lot of little subtle little things like that that'll make a big difference if you just adjust certain parameters. Just adjust certain things and you'll get a better outcome. Yeah, see. And there's little details, like instead of just having the cliff sort of roll off the edge, I have this little elevation of stone here. This is just a little feature to make, to just kind of give you the feeling that this isn't just rolling off the edge here. It's not just like a slope falling off. There's actually some rocks there. There's just little detail stuff. I mean, it's not necessary, but it's just little things to think about. As Bob Ross would say, it's your world. You can do whatever you want. What he didn't say was try to make it not suck. That would have been really good advice from Bob Ross. I'm just going to add some vegetation. Not necessary at this point because I'm still kind of roughing everything out, but this will at least give me some idea as to the type of vegetation I want to have in here. And there's a bunch of different types of different types of vegetation here. So right now I'm just gonna have some basic like shrubbery and bushes and stuff. You can, there's grass and all kinds of different stuff here. I don't want to go too crazy with it, so I'm gonna kind of rein that in a little bit. And so you can just paint that in, and happy little bushes. And there we got some nice looking foliage here. And if you want to change it, you just click on your brush here, and you go to change, and then you can switch it out for, I'm going to switch it up for bushes, fern. And the grass is looking a little brown. Whether you're into that or not, that's up to the individual. I'm going to go change it. I want something a little more green. So I'm going to go to grass and see if I can't get some nice green grass. There we go. Yeah, that's what I'm after. Nice simple green grass here. And you can mix it up too. You can add another if you want to do a different variation on the grass. Just different types of grass. You can kind of mix it up. It's typically good to kind of vary things a little bit, so you don't end up having a cookie cutter look to it. If it's all the same exact foliage throughout the whole map, it's just going to be really obvious that you really didn't put any effort or time into it. Yeah, those are pretty. Little pops of color here and there don't hurt. And you'll notice when you get right up next to your road tool that it's not gonna paint the grass in where you want it to. That's the nature of the beast. But what you can do is you can go over to your objects here, and there is an actual grass object. You can go into nature and find it in here. There's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of different grass objects in here, and you can just place them individually, which is really cool. I don't really recall there being grass objects in previous versions of the Far Cry editor. I could be totally wrong about that. But yeah, and then you can use these to just fill in those gaps if you want to just keep everything kind of tighter to the actual pathway here, so you don't have to rely on the constraints, or you don't have to deal with the constraints of the pathing so much. All right, so there's an issue that you're going to run into here with this hand-placed grass here. So when you look at your vegetation collections here, and when you raise the ground, it automatically just kind of reshapes to it. So you're going to kind of get just a little bit of a natural slope to it. It'll raise and lower with the ground here. That's just, it's part of the function of that tool here. So when I go to my pre-made grass and I raise it, you see, oh shit, look, it's disappearing. It's getting sucked down into it. We don't want that necessarily. So if there is a point where you're trying to raise the ground and you have the hand play stuff there, you don't want to lose it underneath your terrain. The thing to do is you go down to your editor settings down here, and you see where it says keep objects with terrain. If you click on that, now when I move this, it's going to raise and lower it. Now it's going to look a little funny if you do like a little bump like that. So say I want to just go a little bit bigger with it. Well, that's actually really big. Let's go down to, that's good. Yeah, okay. So say I just wanted to raise it. I'll do a quick little flatten tool here. Bring that over here, flatten it out. All right, so I want to have just like a little elevated area over here. I can still do that by keeping my objects with the terrain. That's just one example of why that's a good feature. There's plenty of other reasons to use that. I mean, if you have a bunch of assets placed down and all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I want to reshape my landscape, but I don't want to lose everything or have everything kind of get lost in the mix, then yeah, this little tool will just kind of raise and lower everything with the actual landscape. Yeah, so that's handy. And just hop back over to your painting tool here, and then you can toss stuff in there and sort of paint it around, and yeah, you get some variation there. And obviously, if you go in here, there's trees. There's different palm trees, which is awesome. You make certain types of maps with that. Since we're doing a mountainous scene, I'm just gonna go ahead and throw some pine trees in here. So yeah, I'm gonna click on that, go to pine trees, and I'm gonna throw some of these guys in there, some ponderosas. Just to click here and there, and they're gonna appear where they want to appear. So there's not really like, just imagine that all of the trees and grass exist all in the same space, and when you're clicking on the ground, you're basically turning it on, because that's essentially the function of that. So if I hold the control key and click there, it's going to delete that tree, and that's going to erase all this stuff that I have here. So if I went ahead and erased everything here and then went back and painted it all in using the same tools, it's going to be in the exact same places. So all of these things exist kind of in their own little quantum dimension, if that makes any sense. Yeah, see? And now when I go to erase that, okay, those are gone. And when I paint them in, they're going to fall right in the same places. So it seems like it's random, but there really are just predetermined places for everything. It's just you don't know what they're going to be. So it's pretty strict in its randomness, if that makes any sense. Oh yeah, I like that tree a lot, and I like the way the roots and the soil at the bottom look too. It's a really nice look to that. And that just gives you some variation. And if you look and you see, okay, there's too many of these same trees in here, you can go in and just add another type. Maybe I'll go into recipes, and there's just like a nice mixture of things. This will kind of break up the monotony a little bit. So I'm going to throw in this different type of recipe here and paint over those areas. And see, that's going to give me a mix of different types of shrubs and trees and grasses and stuff. And if you come out here and blow this up really big, you can really kind of get an idea of the type of variety that it's going to give you. Especially if you want to paint it over a larger area. That's just like a really nice meadow. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that you can get out of that. Last but not least, I am going to come up to the top of my little plateau here. I may or may not actually sculpt the rest of this landscape out. I really didn't have any plans for this. I was just kind of messing around. I haven't even saved this yet. I really just made this for demonstration purposes. So this tool here, this is a much overlooked tool. I noticed there's a lot of guys overlooking this, even in doing tutorials and stuff. It's a really handy tool, but it's something that confuses some people. So this is the hole tool. And you might think, okay, what the hell good is the hole tool? It's just literally cutting a hole in the terrain on your map. You typically don't want to do this unless you're trying to be an asshole or create a trap or something. But there's a reason for this. You can use this to gain entry into areas below the terrain. I'm sure you can imagine how this could be applied to your map and what you could do with this. You can build underground bunkers, underground caves, anything that's going to happen underground, you do it through this hole tool. I'm not going to get into that in this tutorial. I just wanted to show you basically what the hole tool does. I'm actually going to do a separate video just showing you what you can do with the hole tool. So yeah, that's it, guys. Let me know in the comments if I was helpful, or if there's anything you want to know, or something that I missed, or just hopefully what I've shown you has given you some idea of what you can really do with this map editor. There's a lot more to it than just painting things in and slapping things in there and just calling it a day. You really can get into quite a bit of depth and detail with this, and this really didn't take terribly long at all. You can really build a nice map. If you're not doing a lot of custom builds, you can really build a nice looking map relatively quickly. That's not to say you should really slap out a bunch of fast maps, but it is worth taking your time on, and this really didn't take that long to build this. This can make like a cool outpost or something. I mean, there's a lot you can do with this. Oh, and before I forget, guys, there is another veteran map builder who is making tutorials as well. He's very well known in the map editor community from way back in the day. He's done some really creative stuff, probably some of the most interesting maps I've seen. If you ask any of the old school map builders from back in the day to name off their favorite mappers, this guy's going to be towards the top of that list. He goes by the name Long Rider. I just recently played his map called On the Rock Beyond the Sun. His map is beautifully executed, very well made. Believe it or not, you can find it on all 3 platforms, PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Super nice guy, very charismatic, very clever and creative. Go check him out. I'm going to post a link in the description below. Yeah, go sub to his channel. Let's get those map skills up, guys. Let's get some beautiful, sexy maps out there. Let's kick it up to the next level. One guy that is going to help you reach that goal is Long Rider. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you found what I have said here helpful in any way, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see more tutorials, you know what to do. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Yeah, thanks for watching guys. I'll see you in the next tutorial.